Farmers react to Trump's sweeping tariffs following Supreme Court ruling. These are American farmers who spent all of 2025 being told to be patient, while losing $34.6 billion in the process. What unfolded between April 2025 and February 2026 is a story about power, policy, and pressure. It is the story of what happens when the Supreme Court strikes down sweeping tariffs in a 6-3 decision, and the administration signs new ones before the day is over. To understand why February 20th, 2026 hit so hard, you have to go back to where farmers were standing before the ruling. Because the mood at the beginning of 2025 was very different from the mood at the end. In April of 2025, the administration declared what it called Liberation Day. President Trump imposed tariffs of at least 10% on imports from nearly every major trading partner, with dozens of countries facing even higher rates. The argument from Washington was simple. Other nations had taken advantage of the United States for decades, and tariffs were the correction. At first, many farmers were cautiously supportive. The AG Economy Barometer from Purdue University and CME Group showed farmer optimism climbing to 70% shortly after Liberation Day. 7 out of 10 farmers surveyed felt positive about where things were headed. American Farm Bureau President Zippy Duvall summed up the mood during a conversation with the president when he said, "We pray to God that you're right." It was not blind confidence. It was not outright opposition. It was hope, with a lot riding on it. Then the numbers began to shift. Farmers started calling 2025 a perfect storm of ugly. The problem was not one thing going wrong. It was two things going wrong at the same time. Costs went up. Revenue went down. Like a pair of scissors closing. In January 2025, the gap between production costs and market prices was essentially zero. Margins were thin but manageable. By April, that gap widened by 12 points. By October, it reached 34 points. That is when difficult turns into dangerous. U.S. customs duties collected in 2025 totaled $287 billion, nearly triple the year before. Farmers were not only facing retaliation from overseas buyers. They were also paying more at home just to operate. Through October 2025, tariffs on agricultural inputs brought in $958 million. More than half came from farm machinery. Hundreds of millions more came from agricultural chemicals, fertilizers, and seed. John Deere estimated tariffs would cost the company $600 million in 2025. Those costs do not stay with the manufacturer. They move down the chain to the farmer. Agricultural economist Daniel Sumner described it clearly. Farmers were hit with tariffs on inputs and retaliatory tariffs on exports at the same time. Pressure from both sides. By the end of 2025, the American Farm Bureau completed its accounting. Crop farmers had lost $34.6 billion during the year. The agricultural trade deficit reached $28.6 billion in just the first half. Farm bankruptcies rose 46%, with 315 Chapter 12 filings. It was the highest level since 2020. 15,000 farms closed in 2025 alone. The total number of farms in America fell from over 2 million in 2018 to roughly 1.9 million. Meanwhile, farmer optimism fell from 70% in April to 54% by December. A Farm Journal survey found that more than 90% of agricultural economists blamed low commodity prices and high input costs for accelerating consolidation in the crop sector. Throughout all of this, the message from Washington remained consistent. Be patient. At the Commodity Classic Conference in San Antonio in early 2026, USDA Undersecretary Richard Fordyce repeated that message, saying these things do not happen overnight. But farmers had already been waiting nearly a year. While the farm economy struggled, a legal battle was building quietly in federal court. The central question was whether the administration actually had the authority to impose these tariffs. Much of the policy relied on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, known as IEEPA. The administration argued that IEEPA gave the president that authority. In April 2025, 5 small businesses filed suit, saying the tariffs threatened their survival. The lead plaintiff was VUS Selections, a New York wine importer, joined by Learning Resources, an Illinois educational toy company. They were represented by the Liberty Justice Center and law professor Ilya Salmon. In May 2025, the U.S. Court of International Trade ruled unanimously that the IEEPA tariffs were illegal. The administration appealed. In August, the appeals court upheld the ruling. However, the tariffs remained in place while the case advanced. In September 2025, the Supreme Court agreed to hear the consolidated case. Oral arguments were held in November. Then the country waited. In December 2025, before the court ruled, the administration announced a $12 billion relief program for farmers. The funding came from the USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation. Most of the money targeted soybean and corn growers. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins described it as a bridge to carry farmers through market disruptions while new trade deals took effect. Not everyone saw it that way. One agriculture professor described it bluntly. Farmers were losing thousands and receiving pennies. In January 2026, 56 agriculture organizations sent a letter to Congress warning that extreme pressures were threatening the long-term viability of U.S. agriculture. That is not the language of a minor disagreement. Section 6. Then came February 20, 2026. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion. The court said clearly that IEEPA does not authorize tariffs. The administration had argued that the words regulate and importation in the statute allowed broad tariff power. Roberts wrote that those words could not carry that weight. The law makes no reference to tariffs or duties. The Liberation Day tariffs were struck down. So were the earlier trafficking and immigration tariffs. The president was informed during a meeting at the White House. He reportedly called the ruling a disgrace. Later, he said he was deeply disappointed and ashamed of certain members of the court. Section 7. But the story did not pause. Within hours of the ruling, the president signed a new proclamation. This time under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. A new 10% global tariff. It took effect on February 24th. Plans were announced to raise it to 15%. Section 122 limits tariffs to 150 days and caps them at 15%. But the administration signaled it would launch Section 301 investigations, which can support longer-term tariffs. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent stated that combining different authorities would result in virtually unchanged tariff revenue in 2026. The legal pathway changed. The objective did not. Section 8. The ruling left Section 232 industry tariffs untouched. But it opened a massive refund question. Economists estimate that IEEPA tariffs collected between $175 and $179 billion. Even before the ruling, more than 1,000 businesses had filed for refunds. By the end of February 2026, over 2,000 lawsuits had been filed. How refunds will work, who pays, and when, remains unresolved. One dissenting justice warned of billions in potential repayments and serious disruption. That question now hangs over 2026. Section 9. Soybean farmers were watching closely. They have seen this before. During Trump's first term, soybean exports to China dropped roughly 50% during the trade war. China is the world's largest soybean buyer. Any disruption there hits hard. The administration pointed to signs of recovery and noted the 2025 agricultural trade deficit came in below early projections. Critics pointed to $34.6 billion in crop losses. A North Dakota State University analysis concluded farmers bore costs that exceeded tariff revenue. There is also longer history here. When the United States withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, estimates suggested farm exports could have increased by $4.4 billion annually under that agreement. That access was never regained. Section 10. Farmers plan in years. They buy equipment on 5-year timelines. They plant in spring based on fall expectations. Uncertainty is expensive. Multiple farm groups asked the administration for clarity after the ruling. Not necessarily lower tariffs. Clarity. By late 2025, the USDA had lost around 20,000 staff compared to earlier levels. At the same time, farmers needed more support. One industry analyst said it simply: tariffs are tools, not toys. Farmers need predictable trade policy and stable markets. Section 11. Here is where things stand as of early March 2026. The Supreme Court struck down IEEPA tariffs on February 20th. A new 10% global tariff under Section 122 took effect 4 days later. Plans exist to increase it to 15%. Section 301 investigations are underway. Over 2,000 lawsuits seek refunds on between $175 and $179 billion collected. Refund mechanics are unresolved. The $12 billion relief program is being distributed, but 315 bankruptcies and 15,000 farm closures had already occurred. Farmer optimism fell from 70% to 54% during 2025. No updated reading is available yet. Conclusion. This story is not simply about whether tariffs are good or bad. It is about what happens when large policy shifts unfold in real time across an industry that plans in decades. In farming, a bad year is not just a smaller paycheck. It can mean losing land that has been in a family for generations. $34.6 billion lost. 15,000 farms gone. 315 bankruptcies. The court said the legal tool used to build the tariffs was invalid. Within hours, a different tool was used to rebuild them. The legal debate continues. The uncertainty continues. And for farmers facing a 34-point cost-to-revenue gap, legal arguments do not change what it costs to plant next spring. Zippy Duvall said, "We pray to God that you're right." That prayer is still in the air. And farmers, who always play the long game, are waiting to see what 2026 delivers.